All righty. Hey, everybody. It's Misty Williams with Healing Rosie. And I'm really excited about this Facebook Live for a couple of reasons. We are going to talk about improving your memory as you age today. And I got a lot of questions when I told you guys that this interview was coming from people in the community. So I know this is a really hot topic. And I'm really excited to be having this conversation because all of us, in our quest for optimizing our health and getting rid of flabby, foggy, and fatigue, are concerned about what's happening to our bodies as we get older. And there's a lot of talk about the rise of Alzheimer's and dementia. We're actually experiencing things like brain fog, where we're struggling to remember things, or our brain just isn't as sharp as it used to be. We're having conversations with people and we might forget what we're saying mid-sentence, or we're walking into a room and we forget why we were going to that room in the first place. So this is very common for us in our communities. Not only are we concerned for ourselves, but we're concerned for our parents too. Many of us have parents who are getting older, and there was a couple people in the community actually who are talking about, have questions about their parents who are in their 80s even. So brain health is a really important topic, and I'm super excited that Julia is joining us today. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much, Misty. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, you told me when we started that you're on a mission as a neuroscience and brain health educator to help 1 million people improve their memory. So why don't you just kind of unpack this whole thing for us? Because obviously, when you think of neuroscience and that whole side of medicine, it's pretty complicated and complex. And I'm assuming that there's something personal in your life that happened that really set you on this path.
Of course. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really am excited to be here. And yes, this is a very personal mission for me. It started about 8 years ago now, maybe even 9. And my aunt got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she has really fast declining Alzheimer's. It really went from with being diagnosed 1 year later, she couldn't remember me, her niece, whom we were very close. She couldn't remember 2 years later, my dad, her brother, and they were very close. And then 3 years into it, she couldn't remember her own kids. And you see the devastation around that, not only with the financial side of it, which not a lot of people talk about, but it is extremely expensive to care for someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia. And most of the time, the burden is put on the family. And so when we talk about costs, we're not only talking about the financial costs, but we're talking about the emotional and the stress cost
Right.
as well that it has on people. So I saw all that coming down, and it was really tragic for the whole family to go through that. We haven't had Alzheimer's in our family, I think mainly because we haven't had anybody live long enough to get it. So this was the first case, and it was really traumatic for all of us. And she passed away relatively quickly within 4 years, which in the end, you're kind of grateful for. But it was really sad. And then we had kind of a trifecta of events. My brother at the same time at 44 had a heart attack, and it runs in my family. I mean, my dad's had 3, my uncle had 2, another uncle passed away, my grandfather passed away from heart attack. So it's really rampant on the men's side of the family. And what a lot of people don't talk about, that I'll get into more detail later, is that the drugs and the medications that we're on really, really affect your memory. And so my brother had to get on statins and blood thinners and platelet thinners. And it wreaked havoc on his memory. I mean, it really, really did. So that was something that we had to work towards. I had my own man I had been dating for 3 years, turned out to be a pathological liar, and lied about having cancer, and then also lied about the fact that he was on the FBI's most wanted list for bank robbers. So he confessed to me 3 years into the relationship, 10 days after I found out he was a pathological liar and lied about cancer. And I turned him into the FBI, and I went into this huge depression. And depression is another one that greatly, greatly affects the memory. So we had this perfect trifecta of events that happened, and synchronistically, we met this scientist, this neuroscientist, who was working on supplements and ways to help brain health and the memory. And both my brother and I mean, it was just like this perfect match at the time to really get all of us better. And I mean, unfortunately for my aunt, there was not a lot. Once somebody has Alzheimer's dementia, there's stuff you can do. And I can talk today about how it's not a losing cause, but especially with hers, how progressive it was, you can't stop the disease once you have it.
Mm-hmm.
So this was absolutely, it just turned into this giant passion of ours. My brother and I started Simple Smart Science 7 years ago now, and we've just been on this mission to help 1 million people make a measurable improvement in their memory. And I say that specifically because memory is very elusive and it's hard to measure. And so we've really figured out the tools. We're working with Cambridge University and their memory tests to figure out how people can measure their memory so that they can see that it's improving.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I love doing interviews like this because this is where I get to really get the information out there.
Yeah. So I have a question about what you were just saying. And it's very common once people get an advanced disease like Alzheimer's or dementia or cancer or one of those diseases. It's challenging for any branch of medicine to be able to help, even functional medicine and some of the, homeopathy and other really great modalities that we talk about a lot. Like once you get to a certain progression in disease state, it's like the body has unraveled so much that doing supplements and changing your diet is just not enough to bring you back from the brink, So I'm curious, just kind of as a segue for you to help us understand maybe what is the progression that's leading us into Alzheimer's and dementia, and how can we kind of spot things early so that we know that we need to do something about it before it's too late?
That's an excellent question. And the biggest thing, if I can just get anything across today, is that science is really showing that Alzheimer's is a preventable disease. And that's really exciting news. The issue is that damage in the brain starts decades before any symptoms show up. So I don't care if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, you have to do everything you can today to prevent this terrible disease from happening. And there's so many things you can do. And even when you start to see symptoms, there are still things you can do. There's really great studies with Alzheimer's patients specifically that highly concentrated coconut oil called MCT oil has helped reduce the symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's by 20%. So that's been really great information to come out in the last couple of years, that once you have it, there are things to reduce it. Honestly, there are so many things are in trial right now with the FDA. There's an ultrasound trial that's going on that has shown amazing results with Alzheimer's patients on reducing the plaques in their brain. Now, the plaques, so many people have the misconception of the plaques. The plaques are not actually what cause Alzheimer's. The plaques are your brain's own protective measure against Alzheimer's. So most people think, oh my gosh, if you have plaques, that's bad. Almost everyone over 40 has plaques in their brain. It's your brain's way of saying, no, don't eat away of any more of my brain. So of course, if you start to get dementia and Alzheimer's, you're gonna have more of these plaques because it's your brain's protective measure. Mm-hmm. So all the science, in the last 30 years have been focused on getting rid of the plaques. Well, the plaques aren't the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So it is important to get to the root cause of the problem. And that's what I would love to elaborate with you today, because it does start decades earlier. And
yeah, that's exactly what comes up when you say it starts decades earlier. Help us understand what's happening in our 20s or 30s or 40s. I mean, obviously, I think all of us probably know that if you have a concussion or some kind of traumatic brain injury, then obviously you've got some injury to your brain. But I would imagine with the prevalence of this disease that it's not necessarily things that are super obvious like that.
It's not. It is, those are absolutely causes of it. And even brain injuries when you're a child, like playing football, or if you fall down and get a concussion. I'm actually pretty against contact sports like that because of it. Those have actually been shown to cause it 80 years later. So what we really focus on, I talk so much about preventative measures for Alzheimer's, and what we want to look at, so let's take this, Misty. So when you were in your 20s, your teenagers in your 20s, what were you doing a lot of every day?
In my 20s. Well, I was in college. I didn't get into anything super active outside of like yoga and maybe like aerobic workouts until my 30s. I started running half marathons in my 30s. So, my daily life was, if I'm being active, hiking, otherwise I'm working, and I was doing a lot of things that that would improve my work performance. I was really into personal development and stuff like that. So
I think you hit it on the nail on the head with all of those. So what we see is, from the moment we're born till about 25, our brains continue to grow. And during that time, people are learning, right? We go all through school, most people go to college, or even if they don't, or even if they do, then they go get a job and they're learning something new and they're climbing the ladder and they're learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. And they're constantly out there challenging their brains. And they're progressing in life. And then we hit our 30s and 40s and we have families and we slow down and our learning curve starts to flatten out. And then when we get comfortable in our 50s and 60s and we're making good income and we're feeling more comfortable in life, our learning curve starts to go down. And one of the things we see is that when people aren't using their memories in their brains, if you don't use it, you lose it, just like any other muscle. And it's really important to get out there and learn something new almost every day. Continue to challenge your brain. Our memory, we don't use it anymore. This is a really, really big problem. And I think that's why we see more and more people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s saying, oh my gosh, I don't remember this person's name, or I'm constantly having these brain fog moments. Well, we don't use our memories, right? I mean, our cell phones, this has been the #1 memory killer because it is, because we don't remember anything. We don't remember phone numbers.
I can't find my way around my own town.
Exactly.
Without my GPS.
I lived in Denver for 18 years. I've lived in San Diego for over 20, and I use Waze to get downtown.
Yes.
It's like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. And that's exactly right. We're not using the memory sector of our brain. We don't remember phone numbers, the way around town, people's names. I mean, it's really taking away from our memory sectors and challenging our brains. So when I work with people, I not only say challenge your brain on learning something new. So that doesn't mean if you're in a business, you learn more about that business. That's great. You want to do that too, but you have to use completely other sides of your brain.
Right.
And looking at brain injuries, what they found is super exciting. If someone has a brain injury, let's say in their creative sector of their brain, what they'll do is they'll put that person in art lessons, or they'll put that person in creative writing or something like that. And it'll actually start to reduce the damage in that part of the brain and make it more balanced overall, so that they have less anxiety. They're more emotionally balanced, things like that. So that's one benefit, but it's also about growing your brain cells and growing new brain cells, because our brains shrink over time. They just do it. They shrink 0.5% a year. Which doesn't sound like very much, but that means by the time you're 75, your brain has shrunk almost 20% from where it was at the height at 25. So that's a lot. And if you don't do everything you can to counteract that, which is learning something new, getting out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself. If you're a pianist by trade, go learn a little bit about math or business, use something that you're uncomfortable with. Most people, I'm not good at math, I never do it. That's actually the wrong approach. If you really want to challenge yourself, do something you're not very good at. Even if it's sports, building that eye-hand coordination is really important. So, and start using your memory. Like I said, the phone is destroying it. So when I coach people, we go through memory drills and I teach them techniques to remember people's names and things like that. If you don't remember someone's name, that doesn't mean something's wrong with your memory. That's a learned skill. It's not, I have a bad memory because I don't remember people's names. That's always the first thing I hear. I never remember anyone's names. Like, no one does, because we are not meant to. If we look prehistorically at our brains, when we first meet somebody, right, we always say first impression, we are sizing up if that person's a threat to us. We're not hearing their name. And of course, the first thing we do as humans is, hi, my name is Julia, right? Well, you're not listening to my name because you're trying to figure out if I'm a threat to you. Now, of course, no one is really a threat to us in this day and age. So 10, 20 seconds later, we figure out they're not a threat and we talk to them. And at that point, we're like, oh, what was their name again? So I always, knowing this, we can teach you how to remember people's names using memory drills or memory techniques, I guess I should say, not drills. But I always try to make it easy for people. So I'll actually repeat my name 30 seconds in, 45 seconds in, and I'll just interrupt whatever they're saying and say, sorry, what was your name again? My name's Julia. And I'll just help, with the process. And I promise you, after 45 seconds or 30 seconds of asking someone's name again, you're going to remember it the second time, because your brain has calmed down from that, immediate, is this person a threat, that little monkey brain that we all still have. And then you remember it and you help them out too. So that's always a little trick I do with names, but no, names is not a problem. But I do take people through memory techniques. I have them, don't write your grocery list, memorize it. Don't use your Waze or your Google Maps. Really think about how to get there. If you've lived there, you know the way. Think about it.
Don't make me.
I know. I do this with my 77-year-old mom. She's so dependent upon Waze just to go to my brother's house, which she has done a million times. And I have restricted her now. Like, you cannot use your Waze, because I want her to have to use her memory, and especially navigation memory is huge. And they've actually shown with taxi cab drivers in London that side of their brain is actually larger than the average person's by as much as 30% because of the navigation. So, so important to use your brain your whole life, and don't get in that comfort zone. Don't get in that repetitive doing the same thing every day. And it goes with exercise too. Like, don't do the same exercise every day. Vary it. We need variation in our life.
Yeah. So you talk about the memory hormone, and because hormones are such a hot topic in our community, especially because we're dealing with women who have the flabby, foggy, and fatigue going on, and hormones are such a big part of that. Why don't you kind of tell us what the memory hormone is and add to our hormone knowledge?
Absolutely. No one ever talks about the memory hormone, and or has really ever heard of it, but it's called pregnenolone. And this hormone happens to be one of the most important hormones in your entire brain. And the reason for that is it's like a foundation. You can't build a house without a foundation. You can't even put up walls without a foundation. And that's what pregnenolone is. It's the foundation for all other hormones. You can't make estrogen without pregnenolone. You can't make cortisol, the stress chemical, without pregnenolone. You can't make progesterone without pregnenolone. So if your pregnenolone levels are low, so will all your other hormones. It's that important. And it's critically important to your memory as well. It helps develop. So there are only a few places in your body where you create new stem cells. And the memory sector of your brain, the hippocampus, is one of them. And it helps you build new stem cells in your hippocampus. So it's very, very important. For men, if you want to go get it tested, and most doctors don't even think about it, honestly. Most doctors, as we know, don't really do anything but treat symptoms, right? They put a Band-Aid on. So we work with a company that helps people get their blood test done outside of a doctor, because normally a doctor won't order these kind of tests. I mean, I don't know anyone. Doctor said, hey, let's test your pregnenolone. Some neuroscientists will absolutely do that. But let's get to the root cause of what's going on. Honestly, thyroid issues is a red hot flag to potentially your pregnenolone is too low. And it does decline with age, just like everything else. You have 65% less pregnenolone at age 75 than you did at 35. And I think it's for all the reasons we've just talked about. You slow down, people gain an average of 10 pounds a decade. So you're overweight. Even if you're not overweight, you're still just bigger than you were. Your body is not functioning the way it did in your 20s and 30s, or even your teens, because you're not treating it the same, right? Well, maybe you're treating it better. A lot of us, I know I'm treating it better, but you're not doing the things brain health wise and memory wise. So pregnenolone is a really big one. I talk a lot about how to increase pregnenolone for people. I'd be happy to share some techniques with you too, if you'd like me to go into how to actually boost your pregnenolone.
Well, what's coming up for me as I'm listening to you talk about that is we've if people in our community are on the mailing list, they've gotten an email from me where we talk about how our body actually makes hormones. And it ties into what you just said about the thyroid, but basically T3 plus LDL cholesterol plus vitamin A equals pregnenolone. That's just kind of like the basic formula that we use just to help us understand how all these things are connected in the body. So many women in our community are dealing with hypothyroidism, and so they're supplementing T3 and of course, or NDT, which is a combination of T3 and T4, or some other variation. And that certainly can improve your hormone levels. But I also know that there are women who are treating their low hormones with estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. And they may or may not be dealing with their thyroid. And therefore, the pregnenolone piece of this isn't being addressed. And the reason is because pregnenolone is the mother hormone and it makes all of our hormones. So I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I want to kind of connect the dots for people so they see how all this is connected. Because, hopefully if we have good T3 levels, we've got good levels of pregnenolone. Do you happen to know the functional lab ranges for pregnenolone?
It's different for men and women. It's about 200 micrograms per deciliter for women, and it's about 300 to 350 for men.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
normal
I'm not
range.
even sure if pregnenolone is in my lab tracker, but I should definitely add it. So why don't you share with us some of the tips for improving your pregnenolone levels?
So supplementation is always a good idea. We talk about adaptogens. That's what I focus on in our company when we look at supplementation. We look at adaptogens, adaptogen meaning it adapts to whatever your body needs. And so things like rhodiola rosea is amazing for that. Ashwagandha is amazing for that. All those are in our Mind Boost Day. A big killer for pregnenolone is inflammation. And that, as we know, comes from stress. It could be any kind of stress. It could be, basic stress that you have in your life. It could be noise stress. It could be eyesight stress, things like that. Hearing stress is a big one. Older people that don't get hearing aids, very detrimental for their brain health. Very, very. My mom actually just went through this. We've been telling her to get hearing aids for years. And I've been talking to her about her brain health for years around it. And finally, somebody else talked to her about it. It goes with kids and parents. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's really affecting my cognition. It's like, yes, I've been telling you that forever. Those kind of stressors really can increase the inflammation in your brain, which puts downward pressure on being able to create those hormones. Also puts downward pressure on being able to create neurotransmitters in your brain and other chemicals in your brain that you really need. So I'm sure you probably talk to your people a lot about inflammation, but I focus so much on it. We sell an amazingly high quality pharmaceutical grade DHA product, omega-3 DHA, because the DHA itself, everybody talks about EPA, but the DHA at 500 milligrams or more has been clinically shown to reduce inflammation and increase the pregnenolone. So that's really, really key if you're talking about supplementation. But lifestyle factors are just as important. I think they go hand in hand. So when I talk to people, yes, I think supplementation is huge. And we are a supplement company. We sell incredible supplements. Our Alpha Omega DHA, our Mind Boost Day, our Mind Boost Night. So they get the 24-hour care. But it really has to go hand in hand. You can't just take a pill and solve something, right?
Right.
It has to go hand in hand with reducing the stressors of life. That I also think is what causes the more accelerated brain shrinkage, the more accelerated pregnenolone shrinkage as we get older, is we're not dealing with these stressors. Our bodies have a way of adapting to a higher level of stress. So we don't really realize how stressed out we are. And so the first thing I usually tell people is go get your cortisol level tested. And you can do that. I mean, you can order that yourself on Amazon, and you want to just test that first thing in the morning and see what those levels are. And it's really important to know if you have chronic cortisol in your body, because that is one of the biggest memory killers. One of the biggest pregnenolone hormone killers is the cortisol stress, excess levels. We need cortisol.
Yeah.
We would die within 2 days if we didn't have cortisol in our bodies. We need cortisol. It's critical. But when you have chronic stress, chronic cortisol problems, it depletes so much in your body, especially your hormones. And it can take up to 2 years. It's really a long process to normalize cortisol. So if you have chronic cortisol problems, it's a long-term process. But boosting something like your pregnenolone can actually be done pretty easily with things like exercise. High intensity interval training is usually best, they found, for that. Of course, the foods you eat, if you go back to a diet is a huge one. A lot of omega fatty acids in your fish and your nuts, avocados, things of that sort. Very, very important as well.
So what are some of the markers if someone's kind of wondering, well, do I have a lot of inflammation in the body? Obviously, I mean, what practically comes to mind is if you're carrying around a lot of excess weight, a lot of that's inflammation. But, we know that like highly sensitive CRP is a great test to measure the inflammation in the body. Are there some other tests that you think are really important to be monitoring how your body's doing when it comes to inflammation?
Because inflammation is so caused by cortisol, that's usually where I start. So test your cortisol levels. Normal ranges are 10 to 20 micrograms. Always test it first thing in the morning, 6 to 8 a.m. And you usually want to test it a few different times because you don't want to just take a snapshot in time, right? That maybe you had a really good night's sleep and your cortisol levels are lower, or maybe they're out of range and you start to get worried. Well, maybe you had a bad night's sleep. Which can absolutely affect your cortisol levels, your inflammation markers, everything. So that's usually where I tell people, because they're so tightly connected. Cortisol is the #1 cause of inflammation. And of course that it comes from stress. So it's just as important to rest as it is to stress. Any athlete will tell you that. They know that they have to rest their body just as much as they stress, and they look at it as a full-time job of the rest. I think most athletes say it's harder to rest than it is to stress their bodies. It's harder to stop working out, but we have to take rest. And that's something we don't do in the States at all.
Yeah.
And it's critically important. We're working 7 days a week, or we only have 2 days off a week. And even then we're thinking about work, or we're getting on our laptops. Stanford just did a study where they forced their athletes to take a rest and to start sleeping longer. So 8, 9, 10 hours, especially for athletes, and their performance increased by 20% in just 6 months. So it's so critical to get that rest, to get the sleep, to get the time off. There was a big consulting firm that just did this too, where they made it's the high-powered consultants. And I can't remember the name of the firm, but they just did a study where they forced their people to take 1 day off a week, a Wednesday. And of course, all of them were like, oh my God, we're going to get so far behind in our work. There's no way we can do this. What are we going to do? And they forced them to do it. And I think they only did it for like 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, they all insisted on continuing to have that Wednesday off because it made them more creative. So they worked more efficiently. They came up with better ideas. And overall, they all were just healthier. And I really believe that that's such a core problem in the States. I just lived the last 4 years in Sweden. They all get 6 weeks paid vacation a year. And most of them take like 4 to 6 weeks in one chunk in the summer. They just take it off, And when I first moved there, it's like, how can people afford to do that? Like, why are the companies not going out of business, And in the end, they have an incredibly thriving economy. Stockholm is actually, they have the second most money next to Silicon Valley for startups. So, I mean, it's obviously they're doing something right. Finland, same thing with their school system. No homework for kids. Half the day is play, all the way up through high school. And they now have ranked the #1 school system in the world.
Yeah.
So you tell me what we're doing wrong.
Right. Totally. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to helping your pregnenolone levels, are you an advocate of supplementing pregnenolone?
So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'll put it that way. There are not definitive studies that it really boosts. So there are some studies that show that it does do good, but if you're really looking at the markers themselves, there aren't studies that really show that long-term use of that is, I would say it's not definitive. So I don't think there are enough studies around supplementation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a whole bunch of questions from our community, and
Sure.
I feel like already at time, except I really want to get a few of these questions. And so we're going to go a little bit longer than I normally go on Facebook Lives, but these are really good. So Eleanor asked, my mother-in-law has been diagnosed with age-related dementia. She's 78. Her husband, 89, is having similar problems. Could this be something in their environment? They have nothing new in their house and eat a fairly good diet, but it is low fat. Otherwise, they're in very good health for their ages. And I feel like you touched on that a little bit when we were talking, but why don't you go ahead and address that question?
Environmental factors are showing to be huge when it comes to causing dementia and Alzheimer's. And so this is an excellent, excellent question and really needs to be addressed more. One of the biggest precursors to Alzheimer's they're finding is mold. And I tell everyone to get their mold levels checked in their house. It's really, really important. And again, it starts decades before. So if nothing's changed in their house, but they've been in there for 30 years, guess what? So absolutely get things like mold levels checked, the water quality, incredibly important. I tell everyone just to get a Brita water filter, you know, if they can go out and buy the really expensive stuff, but if you do nothing else, go get a Brita water filter. Wi-Fi has been shown to do really bad damage. And so it's not something we can control because it's all around us, but I can control it in my own environment. I know some functional doctors that literally have gone back to wires to get rid of the Wi-Fi in their homes where they're sleeping. For me, I turn off the Wi-Fi before we go to bed. I just, even sometimes throughout dinner, I just turn it off. I was telling my dad to do that because he was sleeping right next to his Wi-Fi. He actually had a router that did not turn off. So we had to go out and buy him a different one so that he could turn it off at night when he goes to sleep. One of the worst things you can do is sleep with your phone next to your head. If you're gonna do that, at least put it on airplane mode. The Wi-Fi signals are showing to be very damaging. There are tons of environmental factors. Of course, air pollution is actually being shown to do it as well. Those are things you can't control. Looking at their drugs, prescription medications, long-term, like my dad has been on the same thing. He had a heart attack in his 40s, blood thinners and platelet thinners he's 86 now. So let's do the math on that one, 40 some odd years. And those are actually, statins are okay, but the platelet thinners and the blood thinners have been shown to start to cause Alzheimer's dementia symptoms too. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do around that. Like those are things that are lifesaver medicines, but you can do everything else to combat that. You can work on challenging your brain, getting out of the house, exercising, amazing way to boost your pregnenolone and your BDNF, which we haven't even touched on, but BDNF is a huge one that I talk to people about. Critical protein for your brain. We call it the miracle grow protein. So exercise is an amazing way to do that. Again, taking things like the adaptogens, rhodiola, Bacopa monnieri is a great one for increasing BDNF, things of that sort. So yes, environment, very important. I would say mold is probably the biggest one.
Yeah, awesome. That was great. Okay, Diana says, I'd really like to know how to reduce swelling in my face and head. Is it temporal arthritis, thyroid, and how do you treat it?
So I think that goes back to chronic inflammation. And people with chronic inflammation spend on average $38,000 a year trying to solve this problem. But they're not looking at things like their stress levels, their blood sugar levels, insulin levels are huge. You should definitely, especially if she's talking about thyroid, she should be looking at insulin levels. That's really key for memory as well. They're looking at a lot of insulin levels. But that signifies so much of inflammation and chronic inflammation, what she's talking about. So she should really be looking at that. And it could be anything. I mean, it really, maybe she's living in a, next to a construction site, and so she's not getting her sleep. Who knows? But you have to look at everything.
Yeah. Okay. Deborah asks, what are some really good ways to reduce your Alzheimer possibilities if your DNA shows you could develop it? And I'm assuming she means like the APOA. Yeah. And are any of the nootropics really able to prevent it or increase cognition without screwing up your body or other things? E.g. alpha GPC, I guess it's a nootropic specifically.
Yeah, alpha GPC. Well, let's start back with yes. So what they're finding is that our genes only play a 5% role in what we get later on in life. So just because I have Alzheimer's in my family, just because I have heart disease, cardiovascular disease in my family does not mean I'm going to get it. And you bet your britches, I do everything I can today to prevent that from ever happening. And I think it's a beautiful thing to know that, because then you really can work on the preventative measures. And we've talked so much about the preventative measures. So I'd like to address her question on the alpha GPC. It's a great nootropic. So what we're finding is long-term, there's no side effects to a lot of these. There are side effects to some things if you're looking at, I can't even remember the name of them because they're illegal, but people still take them. It'll come to me. Racetans, any of the acetans, people still take them even though the FDA has said you can't. Long-term effects of those really bad. Short-term, yes, like, woo, I feel amazing, you know. Alpha GPC, GDC, I don't know why that's, I'm getting those letters mixed up. Very good nootropic. You have to take it in very high doses. So if someone is selling a nootropic with that specific ingredient with anything else in it, probably doesn't have enough of the dosage. You have to take that one on its own.
Can you quantify high dosage for that?
Yeah, like 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day.
Okay.
And the average pill only holds 750. So if you're looking at milligrams, so if someone's selling, like they have that inside of another product, we really wanted to use that, but you can't. Like you literally have to have that standalone. Yeah. Most of the studies around nootropics are recent. Some of them go back when you're talking about rhodiola, bacopa, and ginkgo, what we use. Ginkgo is actually, they're showing great studies on people already with Alzheimer's and dementia and how that's reducing symptoms. But those studies, actually, we have studies that go back to 1997 and 1998. That's probably about as old as you're going to get, because before that, 1998, people didn't believe that we could actually change our brains. They thought that our brains were just static. And then in 1998, we discovered that they're actually plastic and they can change, they can grow, you can regrow sectors. So before that, you're not going to find a lot of studies. So long-term, if you're talking, what, we have 20, 30 years, so that's pretty good. No side effects whatsoever with the natural ones. It's really stay away from the chemical ones. You could, you know, like CDP choline is another amazing one. We don't have enough long-term studies, but I think if you're going to take it for a year or two, you're completely fine. That's probably one that you would just take, feel better, and then take again, you know, in another couple of years, just because there aren't long-term studies on it, but it's really good.
Right. Okay. One more question from Terry. Are there baseline tests one should do at 40 or 50 years old to monitor your own progress with brain health? What are normal values and how often should you get them redone?
So I think we touched a lot of this. You know, you're talking about your T values and things of that sort, which are really important. I really think that people need to go get a full hormone panel done. You need to look at your estrogen, you need to look at your progesterone, you need to look at your pregnenolone, you need to look at your cortisol levels, your inflammation markers, testosterone for men, you know, all these different markers. For me, you know, I'm focused on the memory, so I can't really talk outside of that when it comes to the memory or the hormonal markers. I think you can probably do more of that. But I did already touch on the memory ones that we've talked about.
Awesome. All righty. Well, this has been really, really fascinating. I have a feeling that there's going to be a whole lot of people who end up watching this video because this is a hot topic for all of us. You know, I think we all care not only about symptoms we might be experiencing right now, but like we're on this train headed into our golden years at some point, and we're seeing what's happening in society with some of these diseases, and it's really scary. So thank you for sharing with us, Julia. I hope everyone will go download the 7 Best Foods to Boost Your Memory ebook. You can find a link for that right here in the status. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be down in the description. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you want to read more, so on our site with our adaptogens and our products, we actually link to the scientific studies. So if they want to read more of the scientific studies that goes into this, what do the individual ingredients do in your brain? That's all there at simplesmartscience.com. And for your customers, if they want to go in and buy just direct, I'm just happy to give you a 10% coupon code. If they use the coupon code memory, they'll save an additional 10%.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today,
Thank
Julia.
you so much for having me, Misty. This has been really fun.
Of course. Yeah, it's been a blast. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.